Ruth and Isabella were sisters who once shared everything. Laughter, dreams, even pain. They grew up believing that no matter how cruel the world became, they would always have each other. Ruth, the elder, was quiet and gentle, the kind of soul who found beauty in the smallest things. Isabella, on the other hand, was the wild one, bold, charming, and used to getting what she wanted. When their parents passed away, Ruth gave up her education to take care of Isabella. She worked long hours cleaning, serving, doing whatever she could to keep food on the table. And through it all, she never complained. She loved her sister too much to let her suffer. To Ruth, Isabella was her last piece of family. Her reason to keep going. One rainy afternoon changed everything. Ruth was working in a hotel restaurant when she met a man who seemed to carry light with him wherever he went. His name was Daniel. He was tall, calm, and handsome, dressed in a suit that spoke of quiet power. Ruth didn't know he was a billionaire. She only saw kindness in his eyes. When she accidentally spilled coffee near him, she panicked and apologized, her voice trembling. But Daniel only smiled and told her it was okay. There was something about the way he looked at her, gentle, curious, and warm. He began visiting the restaurant more often, always sitting at her section, always asking about her day. Ruth thought it was strange that a man like him would want to talk to someone like her. But Daniel didn't care about appearances. He saw something rare in her, a heart untouched by greed or pride. Over time, their conversations grew longer, and laughter began to fill their moments. Daniel would sometimes walk her home after work, holding an umbrella over her head even when it was barely raining. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Their friendship slowly blossomed into love. Daniel confessed his feelings one evening under the soft glow of the city lights. He told her she made him feel alive again, that her kindness reminded him of everything good in the world. Ruth hesitated at first, but Daniel was patient. And soon she gave her heart to him completely. For the first time in her life, Ruth felt seen, loved, and cherished. Daniel didn't care about her background or her job. He treated her like a queen. He introduced her to a world she had never known before, a world of gentle luxury, laughter, and security. Ruth's days were finally filled with hope. She believed fate had finally smiled on her. When Isabella returned from school, Ruth was excited to share her happiness. She wanted her sister to meet the man who had changed her life. She spoke of Daniel with pride, not knowing that her words were already planting the seed of jealousy in Isabella's heart. The first time Isabella met Daniel, Ruth noticed something unsettling. Her sister's eyes lingered too long, her smile too sweet. Isabella complimented him, touched his arm when she spoke, and laughed louder than usual at his jokes. Ruth tried to ignore it. She trusted her sister, and she trusted Daniel. But deep down, her heart began to whisper fears she didn't want to hear. Soon, Isabella began visiting Daniel's place even when Ruth wasn't there. She claimed she was helping Ruth keep him interested. Ruth believed her, blinded by sisterly love. But the truth was darker. Isabella was falling for Daniel, drawn not by love, but by his wealth and power. Daniel, kind-hearted as he was, didn't notice the danger. He saw Isabella as Ruth's playful sister, harmless, charming. But Isabella knew what she was doing. Her beauty, her confidence, her boldness. She used them all to weave a web around him. One evening, Ruth decided to surprise Daniel with a homemade dinner. She spent the day preparing his favorite meal, smiling the whole time. But when she arrived at his house, what she saw shattered her world. Through the glass door, she saw Isabella sitting close to Daniel on the couch, laughing softly, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel didn't move away. For a long moment Ruth stood there, frozen. The food in her hands felt heavy. Her heart broke silently as tears blurred her vision. She turned and walked away without saying a word. That night, she cried until her voice gave out, asking herself what she had done wrong. The next morning, Isabella came home glowing. She didn't even try to hide it. She looked Ruth in the eye and said the words that cut deeper than a knife. Daniel and I are together now. I'm sorry, Ruth. He chose me. Ruth's world collapsed. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she made, every ounce of love she gave, all stolen by the one person she trusted most. Isabella had not only taken her lover but also destroyed the only family bond Ruth believed was unbreakable. That day, Ruth packed her things and left without a word. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing. She would never be the same again. No one saw Ruth again after that day. Not Isabella. Not Daniel. Not even the neighbors who once smiled when she passed. It was as if she had vanished, swallowed by her own silence. But Ruth didn't disappear to hide. She disappeared to rebuild. At first, the nights were unbearable. She would wake up crying, her pillow soaked with tears, her chest heavy with pain. She had given everything, her time, her love, her heart, and lost it all in a single moment. For days she couldn't eat. For weeks she barely spoke. The world she had known, the people she had trusted, had all turned their backs. But something inside her refused to die. One morning, as she looked at herself in a cracked mirror, she realized she was tired of being weak. She whispered to her reflection, "They broke me, but they didn't destroy me." And that day marked the beginning of a new Ruth. She moved to another city, far away from the whispers and the memories. She found work in a small clothing store, folding dresses and attending to customers. She learned quickly, not just about fabrics but about people, business, and confidence. Every month she saved a little, dreamed a little, and prayed a lot. Years passed. The once timid girl who cried herself to sleep had grown into a woman who understood pain and power. Her quiet strength began to show in her voice, her walk, and even her eyes. She no longer looked down when she spoke. She no longer waited for approval. She became her own anchor. With time, Ruth learned tailoring. She designed her first dress with trembling hands, but when she saw the final result, she smiled through tears. It was beautiful. Simple, elegant, and strong, just like her. Soon, her designs began to attract attention. People loved how her clothes made them feel. Confident, soft, radiant. Ruth named her brand Loom, meaning light, because that's what she had become after surviving the dark. What started as a small shop grew into something bigger. A local magazine even featured her one day. From heartbreak to healing, the woman behind Loom Designs. Meanwhile, back in her old city, life wasn't as perfect as the picture suggested. Isabella had gotten everything she wanted, the man, the money, the fame, yet something was missing. Daniel was distant, quiet, and often lost in thought. Sometimes, when Isabella caught him staring at the rain, she would hear him whisper one name under his breath, Ruth. It drove her crazy. She had everything, yet she still felt like the shadow of another woman. Her sister's shadow. Daniel didn't speak about Ruth, but he thought of her often. Her laughter, her humility, her warmth. All the things he couldn't find in his glamorous but cold marriage. He wondered if she was okay, if she ever forgave him, if she had moved on. And though he was surrounded by luxury, he had never felt poorer in spirit. Then one evening, 4 years after Ruth's disappearance, everything changed. A charity gala was being held at one of the city's grandest hotels. It was a place where the rich and powerful came to smile for cameras and pretend their hearts were clean. Isabella was there, of course, dressed in silver silk, glowing with pride. Daniel accompanied her, though his smile was hollow. And then, as the room buzzed with music and laughter, the doors opened. A hush spread across the hall. All eyes turned to see the woman who had just walked in. It was Ruth. She looked breathtaking. Her dark caramel skin glowed under the lights. Her black hair flowed down her shoulders in soft curls. She wore a golden dress. Elegant, simple, yet so powerful that people couldn't look away. She carried herself with the quiet grace of a queen who didn't need a crown. Daniel froze. The glass in his hand almost slipped. His heart pounded as his eyes widened. He whispered, barely breathing, "Ruth." Ruth smiled faintly. It wasn't the smile of the shy girl he once knew. This smile was calm, knowing, the kind that said she had walked through fire and come out shining. She didn't rush to greet him. She didn't beg for recognition. She simply nodded and moved through the crowd like she belonged, because she did. "Who is she?" one of the guests whispered. "Her name is Ruth," another replied. "The designer behind Loom. She's the sponsor of tonight's event." Isabella's jaw tightened. Her heart began to race as jealousy crept up her throat like poison. She turned to Daniel and forced a laugh. "Well, look who decided to show up after all these years." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were still on Ruth. When Ruth finally approached, her gaze met theirs. Calm, steady, and unreadable. "Good evening," she said softly. Her voice was gentle but carried weight, the kind that silences a room. "Ruth, you look incredible," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "Thank you, Daniel," she replied with a polite smile. "I'm glad to see you both well." Isabella forced a laugh. "Oh, we're more than well. Aren't we, darling?" She wrapped her arm around Daniel possessively, her smile strained. But Daniel didn't respond. He was still staring at Ruth, not with guilt, but with admiration and regret. The rest of the night, Isabella couldn't focus. Everywhere she looked, people were talking to Ruth. They were praising her designs, her poise, her strength. For the first time, Isabella felt invisible. And when she caught Daniel watching Ruth from across the room, smiling, lost in memory, she realized something terrible. She had stolen Daniel's body, but Ruth still owned his heart. Later that night, as Ruth stepped outside, Daniel followed her quietly. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she turned to face him. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" he asked, his voice trembling. Ruth looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled sadly. "Because sometimes goodbye doesn't need words," she said softly. "It needs distance." Daniel's voice broke. "I never stopped thinking about you." "I know," she replied gently. "But you made your choice." He sighed, regret heavy in his chest. "You look happy. Different." "I am," she said. "Pain taught me who I am. And I'm grateful for that." For a moment they stood in silence, two hearts that once beat together, now standing worlds apart. Then Ruth smiled again, and this time it was genuine. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." She turned and walked away, her golden dress glowing under the moonlight. Daniel watched until she disappeared into the crowd, like a dream fading with dawn. Inside the car, Ruth leaned back and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply exhaled, letting go of everything that once broke her. That night, she realized something powerful. Forgiveness wasn't for the people who hurt you. It was for your own peace. And as her car drove off, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, Ruth whispered softly to herself, "I'm finally free." The night Ruth left that gala, the air outside was heavy, quiet, almost sacred. She looked out the car window and watched the city fade behind her. The lights, the faces, the ghosts of her past. It felt like closing a book she had once cried over, now ready to let go. But the past never truly stays buried. It lingers in whispers, in memories, in the hearts of those who never move on. For weeks after the gala, Isabella couldn't sleep. She would wake in the middle of the night, sweating, angry, restless. Her husband, Daniel, was changing, quieter than before, gentler even but distant. He would sit by the window at night, staring at nothing, lost in thought. One evening she finally asked, "You've been thinking about her, haven't you?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Isabella's face hardened. "I gave up everything to be with you, Daniel. Everything. Even my own sister." Daniel turned slowly to face her. His eyes were tired, sad, almost hollow. "No, Isabella," he said softly. "You didn't give up everything. You took everything." That sentence hit her like lightning. She froze, stunned, offended, but deep down she knew he was right. After that, their home was no longer a home. It became a battlefield of silence. Daniel started coming home late. Isabella drowned herself in work, parties, and empty smiles. The love she once stole began to decay in her hands, because anything built on betrayal eventually collapses. While Isabella's world was falling apart, Ruth's was blooming. Loom had become a household name. Her designs were now being worn by politicians' wives, celebrities, even queens. Her brand wasn't just about beauty, it was about strength. Every dress told a story of pain, healing, and rebirth. In every stitch, there was a piece of Ruth's soul, and people felt it. She had also begun mentoring young girls, teaching them not just fashion but confidence, self-worth, and independence. The same girl who once broke in silence was now helping others rise in strength. One day, after a charity event, a little girl approached her shyly. "Miss Ruth," she said, "my mother said you're the woman who turned heartbreak into magic." Ruth knelt, smiled softly, and replied, "No, my dear. I just learned that pain can either break you or build you. I chose to let it build me." That night, Ruth sat in her studio surrounded by her sketches. For the first time she allowed herself to smile, a real smile. She had made peace with her past. But peace doesn't mean the storm won't come knocking. And this storm came with tears. Months later, news began to spread, quietly at first, then loudly. Daniel and Isabella's marriage was crumbling. Rumors of constant arguments, financial troubles, and infidelity filled the air. Isabella, once the envy of everyone, now looked drained, her eyes sunken, her laughter forced. The same charm she once used to get everything had lost its power. She had thought having Daniel would make her happy. But instead, she found herself haunted by the one woman she had betrayed, her sister. One night, unable to bear it anymore, Isabella drove to Ruth's home unannounced. When Ruth opened the door, she was surprised, but calm. Standing before her was Isabella, dressed in black, makeup smeared from tears. "Ruth," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry." Ruth said nothing at first. She simply looked at her sister, the same sister who had once smiled as she took everything Ruth loved. "I thought I'd be happy," Isabella continued, breaking down. "I thought if I had him I'd have peace. But I was wrong. I destroyed us all." Ruth sighed, her eyes soft but distant. "I forgave you a long time ago, Isabella," she said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let you back into my life." Isabella fell to her knees. "Please, Ruth. I have nothing left." Ruth looked away, pain flickering in her eyes. "You had everything once. You just didn't value it." The room was silent, the kind of silence that carries years of regret. Then, gently, Ruth knelt beside her. She placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder and whispered, "I don't hate you, Bella. I just hope you finally see what real love looks like. Not the kind you steal, but the kind you grow." Isabella sobbed, clutching Ruth's hand. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of her sister's touch, not as enemies, but as broken hearts finding peace. A few weeks later, Daniel left the country. He couldn't face either sister anymore. He sent a short note to Ruth, just one line. "You were the only thing real in my life. I'm sorry I realized it too late." Ruth read the letter quietly, folded it, and burned it in her garden. She didn't cry. She simply watched the flames consume the past. Later that evening, she sat by her window, the same way she once did with Isabella years ago, and watched the sunset. The light was golden, soft, familiar. She thought about love, loss, and how life always comes full circle. And for the first time, she didn't feel pain. She felt peace. Her voice echoed softly in her mind. "We can't change what people do to us, but we can decide what we become because of it." She smiled faintly, her reflection glowing in the glass. The girl who once wept over betrayal had become a woman who wore forgiveness like a crown. Months later, Loom held a new fashion show, its theme, "The Power of Becoming." Ruth stood backstage, watching her models walk the runway, each wearing pieces inspired by stages of healing, pain, courage, growth, and light. In the front row sat Isabella, humbled, quiet, no longer the woman of envy, but a woman of reflection. When Ruth's eyes met hers across the room, They exchanged a small, genuine smile. No hatred. No rivalry. Just understanding. As the audience rose in applause, Ruth looked up at the lights, tears glistening in her eyes. She whispered softly, "This is for the woman I used to be, and for every heart that was broken, but still chose to love again."